would allow it, teams can't play until the strike ends.
We also don't want to put coaches, many of whom are teachers, in a position where they are crossing the strike line in order for students to participate. This is one of those, outcomes of a work stoppage that, we all don't want to see happen as a result. But I also don't want to put students in harm's way by having them compete when we don't have enough staff and don't have enough people in order to make sure it's safe for them and the spectators.
In a letter sent today, Lightfoot and Jackson specifically asked CTU leadership to return teachers to the classroom, saying, quote, "Our children and families do not have the luxury of additional days out of school to wait for the process to play out. We ask CTU to stay at the bargaining table and accelerate the pace, but end the strike and encourage your members to come back to work." CTU responded in a tweet, "Can someone let Chicago's mayor know when we said put it in writing, that's not what we meant." The union has also suggested bringing in civil rights leader Reverend Jesse Jackson to help mediate negotiations. To that, Mayor Lori Lightfoot balked.
When you've got a complicated matter like this and you're down to the final strokes, hopefully, bringing somebody brand new in that doesn't have any background or experience in the particulars will only result in delay.
And late this afternoon, Chicago Public Schools announcing classes will be canceled for a fourth day tomorrow. Earlier, it was announced that it was postponing this Wednesday's regularly scheduled board meeting to allow district leadership to focus on negotiations. Also, many central office staffers have been deployed to schools to support the students there, Phil.
Brandis, the mayor said that there has been some progress. What is she referring to?
So she says that her negotiators have agreed to one nurse and one social worker in every CPS school within the next 5 years of the contract term that they are negotiating. They've also agreed to reducing class sizes first in the most high poverty schools and supporting oversized classrooms across the district. I think what they're talking about there is offering teaching assistance for those classrooms that are especially overcrowded. She's also said pay raises for teachers over the next 5 years. And she says that what the city is agreeing to is what the city can afford, Phil.
Brandis, thank you. And now with the latest on another full day of rallying and picketing from the Chicago Teachers Union, we check in with Paris Schutz. He joins us from inside Malcolm X College, where the two sides are negotiating. Paris.
Well, Phil, the negotiations are still ongoing at this hour. In a room just off to my left, we're told that much of the day has been spent with both sides in their respective caucuses going over proposals, as opposed to being face-to-face negotiating. And the CTU is boosted by the news that one of the Democratic presidential candidates, Senator Elizabeth Warren, will be here rallying with teachers tomorrow morning. Now, we were going to be joined by a member of the CTU, but we were just told at this hour that they cannot join us because they are still busy in that bargaining room. But it was another busy day of rallying and picketing for teachers union members all across the city. This afternoon, several hundred joined SEIU union members in Union Park for a rally and march through the loop. And if the mayor had hoped to get them back into the classroom as negotiations continued, well, teachers we spoke with said they were not going to have any of that.
I think she could have negotiated months ago, but she chose until she kind of forced a strike. So now she has to negotiate in good faith.
We shouldn't have to get to this point for that. They should have been bargaining, and it should have been done from February. But they had to let it get to this point. No back to the classroom until she gets. She's going to bargain, we're going to strike.
I mean, I don't think it's really fair. They've had a long time. They've had all summer to try and do something, and to just now try and pull that, it's kind of not great, in my opinion.
So really no cracks in that foundation. Teachers showing solidarity that they are going to stay out of the classrooms as long as there is no deal with CPS. And now we are joined by the City of Chicago's Deputy Mayor for Education and Human Services, Sybil Madison. Sybil, can you just tell us where negotiations stand at this moment?
Yeah, we worked hard today with a lot of exchanging of ideas about proposals. And I feel like we've made some progress.
And so the proposal from the mayor is a school nurse and a social worker in every school within the next 5 years?
Yes, the mayor made that commitment in July alongside Dr. Jackson, and those commitments will be put in writing through this contract.
And what exactly does the CTU say they want to see in writing with regard to that they'll be satisfied?
We're still going back and forth a little bit, but I think that everybody is excited about that staffing proposal, and I think that we'll get to a point where we can both sign off on it.
There have been some allegations I've heard that CTU members have moved the goalposts a little bit, that they're asking for some more things now in the contract. Is that true?
I mean, we continue to go back and forth. That's part of the bargaining process, and we're trying to get down to the core critical issues that are going to help us get our students back in school.
And what about the financial piece, the raise numbers, 16% over 5 years? Is that staying the same?
Yes, that's still the offer on the table for not just teachers, but for all employees.
Now tell us, how populated have schools and libraries and Park District venues been today as they all remain open to take kids in who normally would be in class?
Yes, so every school building is open. We had about 6,500 students show up at CPS schools today. We also had another 3,000 or so show up at libraries, at safe haven sites, at community-based organizations, and at our parks.
So that's less than 10,000 out of 300,000 students. Does that mean the rest of them are just at home or unaccounted for?
We hope that means the rest of them are safe. We really are looking forward to the conclusion of this negotiations and getting to a contract so that all those students can be back in school.
And what's your message to the student athletes that are now learning that they won't qualify for the playoffs on their soccer teams or their football teams unless a deal is reached, I guess, in the 11th hour tonight?
We're working hard to get them back in school. We want our athletes to be able to have a season. We want our seniors to be able to, apply early to college. November 1st is the deadline for early decision. More importantly, we want all our students back in school with their teachers, with the staff and learning, and we're working hard to get there.
Do you anticipate that this is going to last most of the week?
That I cannot tell you. I'm hoping that we're going to come to a conclusion as soon as possible.
All right, Sybil Madison, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Phil, as we mentioned, we had hoped to be joined by a member of the Chicago Teachers Union, but they at the last minute said that they could not make it up here for this interview as they are all in their meeting with their respective caucuses in their union as negotiations still go on. So that's the latest from here at Malcolm X. And Phil, we send it back to you.
Thanks, Paris. Maybe that unavailability is a good sign. And now to Carol Moraine and what some Chicago public school parents have to say. Carol.
Phil, thank you. For the third day now, parents across the city have had to sort out what to do with their children who attend CPS. Now that the strike is in full swing, divisions emerge quite clearly among some of those parents. Some fiercely support teachers and sympathize with their demands, while others are worried about CPS's plan for no makeup days at the end of the school year. Joining us are 4 parents of CPS students who we had on the show last week ahead of the expected strike. They are Katrina Adams of the education policy not-for-profit Kids First Chicago. She lives in the South Side neighborhood of West Chesterfield and has a child in elementary school, and she supports the strike, as does Julie Dworkin of the advocacy group Parents for Teachers. Julie is also the policy director of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless. She lives in Logan Square and has 2 children in CPS. Critics of the strike include Brian Mullins of the Black Community Collaborative, a newly formed community group. Brian lives in the South Shore neighborhood, has 1 child in high school, 2 other children of his graduated from CPS. And Melinda Young of Kids First Chicago. She lives in Humboldt Park, has 3 elementary school-age children. Welcome back, all of you, to Chicago tonight. So Katrina and Julie, the strike has gone on for 3 days, going into the 4th. Has anything about it lessened your support? I know, Katrina, you've had to take more kids in from friends who couldn't make other accommodations. Has any part of your support for the teachers wavered?
Not really. I feel like if the teachers haven't came to a conclusion or bargain, they must feel like the issues that they want in the contract still have not been met. So I still support them. I hate the different things that's going on with the schools and the sports and things of that nature, but I feel for them to give it their all and kind of like stay strong on their beliefs for the strike. I'm still in support of them.
Julie?
I actually feel more motivated to support the teachers because CPS is finally coming around and starting to change its position and put real resources on the table when it comes to class sizes, to staff to support students, homeless students, special ed. And these are not new issues. Parents and students have been going before the Board of Ed for years talking about these issues, and CPS failed to act. So if there's anyone who's responsible right now for the strike and the strike continuing, it's the administration that has failed to address these important issues.
Brian and Melinda, day 4 is almost upon us. You have opposed the strike. Anything changed from either of your positions with regard to what's happening, Brian?
No, I think I started out against the strike. I'm definitely still against it. In the earlier segment, we saw that they are now, it's affecting the sports teams. In my community, I watch children at the McDonald's and at gas stations hanging out in the community that should be in school, so I'm concerned about their safety. I also believe that we have watched some of the issues that CTU brought up at the beginning. They're starting to add different issues to the table, and so I'm concerned. I wish we can have it live viewed for both sides, so we can get to the bottom of it.
And Melinda, for you, any change?
No, I think my frustration level continues to increase. The 4th day being out of school is frustrating. I think the other thing that's hard is that when the school day ends, I don't know where some of these kids go. As the parent of a 2nd grader, they're being released from school at the end of the day when the school day would usually end, and I worry very much for safety of our children.
So you are at home with your child because you work at home, is that correct?
No, I had some flexibility to take some time away from work, which I did do. My children have been in a camp for 2 days, and I will be getting them into another camp. But I think what's really important is to think about the parents who can't or don't have that kind of luxury. This is a serious situation, and I would hate to see something really bad happen as a result.
Brian, your child?
So my son is 15 years old, so he's home with his mom, or his sister is filling in. So he's older. He's had a few friends over that didn't have those same places to go, so we're trying to fill in.
Julie, what about you?
Well, one day I stayed home, 2 days, friends of mine took care of my son. I'm trying to get my parents to help out. His dad's gonna stay home one day, so we're just kind of piecing it together day by day.
Katrina?
Actually, I stayed home and I went over different things with my daughter, as well as I had my niece, and then my friend brought her 2 kids over, so I was kind of like a mini school daycare.
You're kind of a nursery school, elementary school. So Lori Lightfoot has argued that the teachers should go back to the classroom while the negotiations continue. Is any part of that workable in your mind?
I guess the teachers feel like we went back to work without a contract, and so I don't know if that trust has been established with, I guess, CTU and the mayor to actually come to some agreement. I guess they feel like if they go back to work, maybe the issues will be delayed, and all the things that they worked so hard to kind of like get in the forefront would kind of like be forgotten.
So the letter doesn't fly for you, and I'm guessing, Julie, it doesn't for you either?
Frankly, I think it's kind of a ridiculous request. The day that the teachers took the vote on whether to strike, my son came home from school and I asked him, did your teachers vote for the strike? And he said, of course they did. What choice did they have? If they didn't vote for the strike, they'd be just giving up. So even an elementary school student could see that the strike is their leverage. It would be like CTU saying, give us a signed contract with all our demands and then we'll go back to the negotiating table. It just takes away all the incentive to compromise.
Brian, in your neighborhood, is there a diversity of opinion on this, for and against?
Talking to parents and the teachers, I believe that we see people that are against the strike. I think, of course, you're going to find some parents that are for it, usually the ones that are connected to teachers or someone in education. But again, our children are 37% behind white children, 10% behind Hispanic children, and we need to have our children in the classroom. So to negotiate while teaching, I think would be the best way to come to a conclusion.
Melinda, you're in Humboldt Park, right?
I am.
And so do you see divisions within parents there?
The parents I've spoken to, as a member of the local school council and a member of the parent advisory board that I work on, they have all talked about some frustration that they're feeling. I have 2 children who will be eligible for applying to either a CPS academic center or high school. The grades this year matter. And I have very little time left now in Q1 to help them, should we go back to school, to make sure that our grades are in a place that would make them eligible to even apply for that program.
So Elizabeth Warren is coming to town tomorrow. Does that going to in any way make a difference in any of your judgments? Help it, hurt it?
No, I think it's part of what we keep seeing with Chicago Teachers Union. They are a political union compared to organizing union nowadays. I think that's one of the reasons they couldn't end the strike today, because they have Elizabeth Warren in, they had Bernie Sanders there, and we can't lose sight that this is politics we're seeing play out.
So, Julie, how's the mayor doing, do you think?
Well, unfortunately, she ran on a platform saying that she wanted to see equity in the schools, more resources in the schools, and she hasn't stood by that promise. Instead, she's picking a fight with the teachers. She should be the one who should be coming to the table to work collaboratively with them to create the resources we need for the schools.
Melinda, how are the teachers doing?
How are the teachers doing?
CTU, in terms of public opinion, do you think?
I'm frustrated. I feel like it's become a lot of political rhetoric. I feel like there's a lot of people digging their heels in, and this is becoming a real frustrating experience as a parent, because I have very little transparency into what's going on right now.
Katrina, where do you think this ends? How many more days?
Hopefully it ends very soon, because I'm sure the teachers want to get back to work. I know my daughter's missing school, so I just hope both sides can come to some type of agreement where we can, get our students back in school and resume life how it was.
Anybody got an educated guess of how many more days?
I think a lot's at stake, and the teachers should continue to fight.
I would say, look for Friday after the presidential candidates leave the area, then maybe they can get back to negotiating.
Maybe so. Katrina Adams, Julie Dworkin, Brian Mullins, and Melinda Young, thank you very much for joining us on Chicago Tonight. There's much more ahead. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the City Club of Chicago.
Smart people may disagree about what makes a great city, but part of what makes Chicago great is that we don't have to agree. To run a city like ours, a lot of issues come up. The City Club of Chicago is a place to debate those issues and hear from the men and women who shape the policies, lead the industries, and tell the stories that define our city. For the free and open exchange of ideas, the City Club of Chicago.
President Trump spoke at length to reporters today about his possible impeachment, pulling troops out of the Middle East, and reversing course on holding the next G7 summit at his Trump-Doral golf resort.
It would have been great, but the Democrats went crazy. Even though I would have done it free, saved the country a lot of money. Then they say, oh, but you'll get promotion. Who cares? You don't think I get enough promotion? I get more promotion than any human being that's ever lived. But I was willing to do this for free. And it would have been the greatest G7 ever.
We spoke with PBS NewsHour's White House correspondent Yamiche Cinder earlier today to get the latest. We started by asking her if the White House's efforts to clean up acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney's statement that there was a quid pro quo regarding Ukraine aid being withheld was working.
It doesn't seem to be working, and the main issue there is that Mick Mulvaney on camera said that President Trump held up military aid from Ukraine because he wanted them to look into this Democratic National Committee debunked claim that there is some sort of server that's holding emails of Hillary Clinton and maybe even interfered in the 2016 election to support Hillary Clinton. So the White House has been trying to backtrack what Mick Mulvaney said, but it's pretty clear what he said at the press briefing, and now he is saying now that his words are being misconstrued. I've been texting with Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney, and he's also saying that he thinks Mick Mulvaney is really, his words are not being taken clearly, but it's just really, really clear what's on video.
Yamiche, one of the things the president talked about was reversing his decision to hold the G7 summit at his Trump-Doral resort. We heard a little bit about what he said. What was the larger message he was trying to send?
President Trump was really trying to send the message that he was being treated unfairly and that people were really making a much ado about nothing, and that this G7 next year would have been the greatest G7 if it had been held at Trump National Doral, which is his property in Florida. But it's been pretty clear that Republicans have had real problems with the president holding the G7 and making, at least seemingly making, money off of the G7, this international meeting. So Mick Mulvaney, when he made the announcement that the G7 was going to be at the Trump National Doral, he said, even I was a little surprised, but I've now been convinced that this is the best place to do it. So the president is really having to reverse himself on this issue, and it's something that we have not seen from the president really ever in his presidency. He's been very, very rarely wanting to backtrack, and he's really only done that with child separations in some cases. He's also done it when it comes to the government shutdown, but for the most part, the president sticks to his guns even when it's controversial.
The president also talked about bringing troops home that were fighting with the Kurds in Syria, but those troops are not exactly coming home, are they?
Based off of the reporting that's been circulating, the clear issue is that the troops that President Trump is taking out of Syria, that they're going to be actually moving to other parts of the Middle East, maybe other parts of the world. The president has really been making the case that he ran on the platform and on the idea that he was going to stop endless wars in the Middle East. But his supporters are excited about the fact that he's now pulling troops out of Syria, but they're now just starting to learn that these troops are not going to be coming home to other states that he's won, like Wisconsin and Michigan. Instead, they're going to be in the Middle East working on other sorts of conflicts there.
What, if anything, changes in the impeachment inquiry with the death of Chairman of the Oversight Committee, Elijah Cummings, last week?
Well, someone is now going to be stepping in to be the new chairwoman of that committee, the number 2 of the Oversight Committee. But add to that, really, Democrats are going to be forging ahead. They have a long list of people that they're going to be deposing. Just tomorrow, they're going to be talking to William Taylor. He's a civil servant. He's a career official in the State Department. He was the one who famously sent a text that said it would be, quote, crazy for President Trump to hold up military aid for political reasons. So it's going to be very interesting to see what he has to say on the Hill tomorrow. But also, Democrats have a long list of people that they're going to talk to, including Trump administration officials who say they're happy to come if they are subpoenaed because they feel like it's a legal obligation that they have to come to the Hill. That's, of course, a lot different than what the White House is saying, because the White House is still saying that officials within the White House are not going to be complying with any sorts of documents requests or any sorts of requests for testimony.
Republicans are trying to censure House Intelligence Committee Adam Schiff. Remind us why.
Republicans are making the case that Adam Schiff, who is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, they're making the case that he's biased, that he's already decided to impeach the president, that really this impeachment inquiry is just a farce, and that they believe that he already wants to make up his mind and has already made up his mind that President Trump is guilty of pressuring Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden for his own political gain. So that's why Republicans essentially want to censure Adam Schiff. The president has given him a nickname called Shifty Schiff. He really feels as though he has not gone about this fairly. But Democrats are basically forging ahead and saying you don't have the votes to censure Adam Schiff. And by the way, we got the control of the Congress because President Trump essentially was not able to get enough people to vote for Republicans in the midterm. So in some ways, Democrats are feeling really good about this next phase in the impeachment inquiry. And from my sources, from what I can tell from my sources, they're not very worried about this attempt to censure the chairman of the Intelligence Committee.
Yeah, Michelle Cinder, thank you so much as always. Chicago's top cop isn't going anywhere, at least for the time being. Amanda Vinicky has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Amanda.
Phil, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot says she's heard rumors swirl that Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson's dismissal is imminent. Same for Johnson's first deputy, Anthony Riccio. But she says she doesn't know where those rumors are coming from. Both are very much still on the job.
Look, let's be fair. These are 2 human beings who work their butts off for the city of Chicago, and they're doing their jobs. So speculation about this one's resigning or that's not helpful. And, we have to keep focused on making sure that we keep our community safe.
The city inspector general is looking into an incident involving Johnson last week when the police chief was found slumped behind the steering wheel of his car. Lightfoot says she's waiting the results of that independent review before commenting on it. Meanwhile, the mayor's giving glimpses into how she plans to fill an $838 million deficit in next year's budget. There's her plan to increase the city tax on single Uber, Lyft, and other ride-hailing trips. She's floating a higher tax on restaurant tabs, and her office says it's merging departments and holding out on hires to save. Now she's unveiled a plan to refinance existing city debt, similar to refinancing a mortgage. Her office says paying lower interest rates will generate $200 million of savings.
You're going to see that we place a huge emphasis on structural changes that are not one-timers, that don't just get us through next year's budget, but really provide structural change in the out years as well. We're very focused not just on 2020, but 21 and 2022 in particular, in part because we have to climb a significant pension ramp in each of those years.
But critics say banking on all of the savings in this year's budget will add pressure down the line. A blueprint for state-funded road work is out, $23.5 billion of construction on roads and bridges that'll take place over the next 5 years, as prioritized by Illinois Department of Transportation engineers.
These experts used rigorous and objective selection criteria, evaluating each road's physical condition, crashes and fatalities, frequency of use, types of vehicles traveling on each road, and most importantly, safety.
Illinois puts out a transportation plan like this annually, but Governor J.B. Pritzker says this plan doubles the typical investment into roads and bridges. That's paid for by a higher tax on gasoline. The state gas tax increased to 38 cents in July, also by an extra $50 charge for license plates. Now, as for the weather, tonight mostly cloudy and windy with a low around 45 degrees. Tomorrow, a slight chance of showers, otherwise cloudy and breezy with a high near 50. Now, Phil, back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, we get an update on the ongoing high water levels across the Great Lakes. Before 3D printing, there was Mold-a-Rama. Learn more about Chicago's very own souvenir machine. At one point, it looked like it might never be redeveloped, but the old post office has finally had a multi-million-dollar makeover. And your thoughts on former Cubs manager Joe Maddon's departure and more in viewer feedback. But first, some of today's top business headlines from Crain's. Here's Danny Ecker.
Phil, the Ford plant on the city's far south side has been causing some big headaches for the automaker, which is expected to report lower profits this week in a third quarter earnings report. Ford CEO Jim Hackett told Wall Street analysts earlier this year the redesigned Explorer SUV made at the Chicago plant would help fix its underperformance. But the plant has been plagued by personnel and productivity issues, according to a new Bloomberg report. That's caused a struggle to get the new SUV out the door, and Ford has shipped thousands of the Explorers made here to another factory in Michigan to be reworked. Bloomberg said roving groups of Ford workers in Chicago are intimidating other employees, driving up turnover and leaving some vehicle assembly unfinished. Meantime, the owners of the United Center are eyeing a $10 million license to run a sports betting operation inside or within a few blocks of the arena. In an interview with Crain's about the 25th anniversary of the building's debut, Bulls owner Jerry Reinsdorf and Blackhawks owner Rocky Wirtz talked about their vision for new development surrounding the venue, which they'd like to see become a destination for entertainment on non-game days. Sports betting will be a key piece of it if they get their way, but they're waiting for the Illinois Gaming Board's guidance on how they'll roll out and regulate sports wagering, which Illinois legalized in June. The United Center recently capped off a 5-year renovation with a price tag of around $250 million. That includes development of new practice facilities for the Bulls and Blackhawks and a new office building and atrium attached to the arena. And finally, the state has tapped a community development banking veteran as its new affordable housing chief. Kristen Faust has been named executive director of the Illinois Housing Development Authority. The agency finances affordable housing development by issuing bonds to raise private capital and also allocates state and federal funds to housing developers to address the city's affordable housing crisis. For Crain Chicago Business and ChicagoBusiness.com, I'm Danny Ecker. Phil, back to you.
Thank you, Danny. This summer saw Lake Michigan reach near record high water levels, which subsequently swallowed up beaches, piers, and sidewalks across Chicago and the region. And while levels have declined from their peak in July, they remain almost 3 feet higher than the long-term October average. So what's behind this ongoing trend, and how could it impact infrastructure and recreation across the region? Joining us is Joel Braumeyer, President and CEO of the Alliance for the Great Lakes. Welcome back to Chicago Tonight, Joel.
Thanks,
First of all, what's the latest status of water levels in Lake Michigan and across the Great Lakes? You mentioned that 3-foot increase number. Amplify on that.
So we kind of grazed a record high here in Lake Michigan this summer. The last record was 86. We just about got there this summer. The interesting thing about what's happening right now is that the lake levels do tend to go down in the fall. What we're seeing is a little bit of a plateau. They're not going down as quickly as you might expect for October and getting into November. So we're actually seeing some sustained high water across the Great Lakes. As we get into the fall, that brings, as we saw today in Chicago, big winds and big storms, and then that wave energy can really do some serious damage to the shoreline.
Well, let's back up just a bit and remind us why we're seeing the higher lake levels in the first place this summer.
Sure. So lake levels are largely a function of rain and evaporation. So the more rain and snow we get and the less it evaporates, the more that water stays in the lake. We've had a series of very wet springs and a couple of cold winters that have tamped down that evaporation. That means that water builds up in the lakes, and so what we've seen is that sort of meteoric rise in lake levels very quickly from what was a record low that we had sustained during the early part of the 2000s. And so a few years of heavy rain and less evaporation makes those levels jump right up.
And more on why it's more dangerous this time of year to have those higher lake levels than it would be, say, in the summer.
So in the summer, that's when everybody sees the water and they see that the beaches have gone away. But in the fall and the winter is when you really get that storm damage. So you have extreme storms coming in, high winds, those big waves that actually crash against the shoreline, and they literally tear out the sand and the other infrastructure from the shoreline. It can do some real damage because of the intensity of that wave energy.
Can anything be done about these higher levels, or just the sort of thing that one has to wait out?
Yeah, well, so is this natural, or is this something that's actually being caused by humans? These extreme volatility that we're seeing, this jump back and forth between low level and high, this is a symptom of climate change for sure. And so we're seeing the impacts of these extreme changes on the Great Lakes. In the short term, there's not a whole lot we can do to address these high lake levels other than learn to live with it and try to do our best we can to have natural shorelines that actually can keep the lakes healthy. In the longer term, we're going to have to manage the reality of lake levels that are going to change pretty dramatically and unpredictably from year to year.
But my understanding is that the fluctuation in lake levels is typically a good thing. Explain.
So lake levels go up and down naturally, and so we see these lows and highs, but that's a normal process. These are, remember, living lakes, right? They're not bathtubs. So we love to use them for swimming. They're also great habitat for fish and wildlife. So as the lake levels go up and down, it changes the character of the shoreline. Sometimes it's dry, sometimes it's wet. That increases the diversity of the habitats that support fish and wildlife. In fact, over on Lake Ontario, far east of Chicago, that lake is actually managed, so that means it's totally controlled in its level. And just recently, there was a new level management regime put in place that allows the water to fluctuate more naturally, leading to the actual restoration of more than 60,000 acres of coastal wetlands, which is critical habitat for the lakes. So those changes in lake level are actually really healthy for the Great Lakes.
Is that the sort of model that could be replicated in the other Great Lakes, what was happening at Lake Erie?
Well, what's important is that we learn to live with the lakes the way they are, right? So they're going to go up and down, and we want to make sure that as best we can, we're using natural infrastructure, so the kinds of plants and coastal structures that allow the lakes to actually fluctuate naturally like they do, and maintain some of that great habitat and that great diversity that is why people love the Great Lakes so much.
Any impact on industry, on recreation as a result of these lake levels?
Yeah, well, the shipping community loves it because it means they can actually ship more goods because they can draft their boats deeper in the deeper water. Recreational boaters get a little hamstrung because they have hard times accessing their docks. If you go up and down here in Illinois or even up in Wisconsin and Michigan, you'll see that a lot of docks are actually overtopped with water, making access more difficult. It varies from place to place. The reality is a lot of those impacts are going to be short term, so even though the lakes are at a record high right now, next year they could be a little higher, they could be a little lower, they could change dramatically within a year or two.
There's been a call to look at the way that Lakeshore Drive is fortified. Some people saying it really needs to be a priority and that the infrastructure needs to be built to really protect it. Your thoughts on that?
Well, after the last record high in the mid-'80s, Chicago invested more than $300 million in shoreline protection, because anybody who was here at the time remembers that Lakeshore Drive was flooded repeatedly by the waves crashing over the shoreline. And so all those stepstone revetments, those concrete blocks that go down to the lake, are the product of this hundreds of millions of dollars of investment that happened from that time forward. Chicago was able to do that because it's protecting a federal, a U.S. highway, Lakeshore Drive, and so there's access to federal dollars that made that possible. Now what's being floated is the idea that we should straighten out the last bit of the Lakeshore Drive S-curve and actually build new parkland, make Lakeshore Drive, that area around Oak Street, a little easier to pass through. That plan's been under development for the better part of a decade, and you know, it's certainly an option. I don't know that it's critical to do because the lake level is high right now, but it's, you know, certainly something that can be considered as continuing to improve the Chicago lakefront.
Joe Braumeyer, thank you so much for the update. Very much appreciate it.
Thanks, Phil.
For more than 50 years, unique vending machines scattered throughout Chicago area zoos and museums have sold visitors souvenirs made of melted plastic. While Mold-a-Rama may seem like a thing of the past, the man behind the local family business works daily to maintain the machines. We recently brought you this story, and here's Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia with another look.
Next to the model railroad at the Museum of Science and Industry, Paul Jones is checking on one of his Mold-a-Rama machines.
We check it mechanically for every coin it accepts. So we'll put a nickel, a dime, a quarter, and then a dollar, paper dollar, just to make sure that everything is working.
If you've visited Chicago's museums or zoos in the past 50 years or so, chances are you've encountered a Mold-a-Rama machine.
So what you see up here under the dome is actually the workspace of the machine.
For $3, the machine injects hot melted plastic into a two-piece aluminum metal mold. Air is blown through the model to hollow it out, and then the souvenirs cool down before it's dispensed. All in under a minute.
It actually takes 45 seconds, 45 to 50 seconds to make this, and it takes another 15 to 20 for the machine to catch up to make another.
The design of a Mold-a-Rama corresponds to its location.
Everybody my age and older can remember coming here to see baby chicks born while you watch. And this mold commemorates it. It's actually two chicks. One still has a shell on his head.
In the museum's Space Center, what else but a space shuttle?
Biggest mold we have.
Some might call it vintage 3D printing. The last Mold-a-Rama machine was made in the mid-1960s. They debuted at the 1962 Seattle World's Fair and gained even wider attention 2 years later at the New York World's Fair.
Visitors make their own souvenirs. In fact, Dino is the most popular souvenir sold at the fair.
Jones says Mold-a-Rama's original owner, the Automatic Retailers of America, sold off their machines in 1971. That year, Paul's father, Bill Jones, a former accountant, began buying machines, starting with 10 at Brookfield Zoo and 2 more at the Museum of Science and Industry.
My dad's family thought he was a little bit crazy to give up a steady accounting office job for this, but machines were 6 years old then. It was 1971, and he took a risk.
Over the years, the company continued buying and rebuilding machines and eventually acquired the Mold-a-Rama trademark. They now operate 63 machines in 5 different states. Jones holds on to the company's original designs.
We have just about every mold we've ever run on display in different colors, and some that have never been run.
While checking on the 2 machines at Lincoln Park Zoo, Jones reflects on the local legacy of his family's business.
If you grew up in Chicago, at some point in your lifetime, you've either seen a Mold-a-Rama or made a Mold-a-Rama. And I couldn't imagine Chicago without Mold-a-Rama, or Mold-a-Rama without Chicago.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Evan Garcia.
And you can visit our website to learn more about Mold-a-Rama and let us know if you have a favorite model. The hulking old post office building that lay empty for 2 decades and that many feared would never be redeveloped will shortly reopen. What was once the largest post office in the world that sent Sears and Montgomery Ward packages across the country and around the globe has finally been given a multi-million-dollar makeover as an office space. Already some 2/3 of the available space has been leased to the likes of Uber and Ferrara Candy. So how have the architects done in repurposing this mammoth structure? Joining us now to give his take on the makeover is Blair Kamen, Pulitzer Prize-winning architecture critic for the Chicago Tribune. Blair, when an architect and his or her team is confronted with something that is this ginormous, to use a term that my grandchildren use, what are the things that they have to address? What are the problems they have to solve?
In this case, they have to make the ginormous exterior look, respectable rather than falling apart, which is what the old post office was doing.
And we have a series of before photos here that you might be interested in taking a look at as you talk about this ginormous undertaking.
Yeah,
oh, look at that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge building, 2.5 million square feet. It's an industrial behemoth inside. Before, it's been cleared out now. You can see these vast floor spaces that can fit 2,000 people per floor, where once there were all these conveyor belts, and now you've got a lobby that's been restored, an Art Deco lobby. There's still some things remaining, like these corkscrewing chutes. Portions of the building, as you saw before, had this Art Deco treatment. That's where people enter. So I mean, you've got to make it attractive to tenants. And you've got to clear it out, and you've got to, clear out the asbestos, the lead-based paint, and open it up, and essentially gut rehab it so it becomes an entirely new thing.
You were talking about addressing some of the issues on the exterior of the building. How would you assess the building overall as a piece of architecture that they had to work with?
It's an austere behemoth. It's a lot like the Merchandise Mart in the sense that, the Merchandise Mart is even bigger, 4 million square feet versus 2.5 million square feet. Same architects, Graham Anderson, Probst & White, the firm that did the Wrigley building. What they did was they took vertical piers of limestone. In the 1921 portion, which you're seeing here, there were these big industrial loft-type windows. And so they took this very utilitarian thing and gave it a kind of, muscularity and directness that's very characteristic of Chicago.
They didn't try to gussy it out. They didn't try to prettify it.
But there are these very elegant touches. A portion of the old post office was an office building for the Postmaster General. And that side, which you're seeing here along Van Buren Street, has these beautiful monumental windows, marble door surrounds. It's very elegant as you move in, and it was a great place to, file your taxes on April 15th as you scuttled up the steps. So it's a tough industrial building, but it also has this very elegant side to it.
And the first thing you encounter, obviously, when you go into this building is the lobby. Tell us what they did to the lobby.
Well, the lobby was beautifully restored. Gensler, the firm that was in charge here, worked with consultants, and they cleaned up the marble. They cleaned these beautiful Art Deco lanterns that you can see. I mean, this space is so nice now that weddings are scheduled to be held there. So it's one of the great interior spaces of Chicago, and it's been cleaned up.
Is it about the size of a football field? Did you write?
It is 340 feet long. That's 20 feet shorter than a football field. There are also these wonderful touches, gold mosaics, these panels which show the progress of transportation over the years from Pony Express to airplanes. That's how they move the mails. So I think these things are important because they tell the story of the building. This building was modernized, but the history wasn't erased. So, you can go in there and, you still sense that the industrial past of the building, the fact that it was this machine that moved all these letters and goods, That it's been changed. It's now these vast office floors for companies like Ferrara, which just moved in over the weekend, Walgreens and Uber.
We saw the lobby. Tell us about the rest of the first floor. What can be seen there now?
Well, the rest of the first floor has been changed, and it has this very sleek industrial type interior design by
Looks
Gensler. Stunning. Yeah, it's very sleek, not kind of sepia tone nostalgia. There are elevators or escalators right here that you see built on a plinth. They had to build this plinth because they had to have escalator. They had to hide
What's
escalator. A plinth is like a platform. Sorry. And they had to build that because the escalator equipment couldn't go below because there were Amtrak and Metro trains running there. So they had to essentially build, this like hill to hide the escalator equipment. And then the escalators take people up to the second floor. They needed to do that because the Eisenhower Expressway runs right through the middle of the building.
What are we looking at here? Is this the
Here's
second floor?
There's a bar here. There's a bocce court. There's the bocce court. There's a gym here that has a boxing ring in it. I think it's boxing for fitness. If you're a little uptight at work and you feel like punching out your coworker, you can get out a little stress.
Is this a vault or a safe?
This is gosh, I'm not actually.
I think it looks like a bar to me.
Yeah, this is the bar, and there's some beautiful clay tile ceilings here. There they are, as if on cue. And it's, so they've really kept a lot of the history of this building. And that's really all to the good. I mean, they didn't erase it.
It doesn't look like they spared many expenses on this. It looks pretty plush.
Yeah, this was an $800 million plus job. And I think that as the tenants, came in and they had companies like Uber, they upgraded it as they went along. This is not a cheapo budget, rehab of an old hulking industrial building. It's hip, not hulking now.
You said that it can hold 2,000 employees per floor. How do you think in its new configuration it can work as an office space?
I think that remains to be seen. I think that these are enormous floors, and the interior designers of spaces like Ferrara's, you can see, have tried to subdivide the floors, but retain the openness. In other words, they have like things like, you can see the corkscrewing mail chutes, but they've created like little areas within these spaces for conference areas. They've kept the office dividers low to allow some natural light to filter in. One of the advantages here is that the windows of this building are enormous. They're 16 feet high, and the ceilings are 19 feet high. So that really lets light penetrate into the interior. If these spaces had 8-foot ceilings, oh God, they'd be awful. No one in their right mind would want to rent there. So the jury's still out. We'll see whether people feel like they're working in an ant farm, or whether it's collaborative and exciting and energetic. It just remains to be seen. It's really hard to tell.
What's the potential impact on the neighborhood in terms of further development, in terms of housing for people who are working there and so forth? What do you think might happen?
It's enormous. I mean, this is, you've got a few blocks away, you've got Willis Tower, the base of Willis Tower being reconfigured. Near Union Station, you've got a new office building going up. So there's this whole portion of the Southwest Loop that has been, dull and dead, and it's going to come alive. And the question is whether it becomes an interesting place to go, or whether it, remains as it is right now, kind of this, kind of pretty boring part of town, really. I mean, the post office is in such a boring area that they had to put in 80,000 square feet of amenities inside the building. So in other words, if it is simply internalized, all that stuff inside, it's not really going to make a big difference. But they're planning a riverfront plaza. They're going to have a food hall that opens out onto the plaza. So some of the energy inside this building that'll eventually get when it's full, or fully open, I should say, next year, hopefully will spill out. And then, more shops will open and the streets will be livelier. They could also be a little more crowded. But I mean, one of the advantages of the post office is that it's so near everything. You've got 3 train stations nearby, you've got the Blue Line, you've got a CTA bus terminal. So the centrality of transportation that made this building work in the first place has now been repurposed.
So the potential is tremendous.
It's big. Yeah, it really is.
Blair Kamen, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Phil.
And up next, we hear some of your thoughts on the end of Chicago's e-scooter pilot program.
Don't miss one of our stories. Get them all delivered to your desktop or mobile device with a subscription to the WTTW News Daily Briefing. Go to WTTW.com/daily briefing and sign up.
Before we go, some viewer feedback. Earlier tonight, we heard from city leaders, the Chicago Teachers Union, and parents on the teacher strike. And now, here's what some of you had to say. You think this is an easy job? Go sign up to substitute teach in an overcrowded, under-resourced inner-city school and report back about how teachers are overpaid. I'm just wondering how it is that any Chicago taxpayer could support the teachers and a strike. The teachers are not striking some faceless corporation or government entity. They're striking you. The city is to blame. The teachers are always getting the short end of the stick. Teachers do care, but they are also fed up. CTU always waits until school is in session for a couple of months to build the possibility of a strike to a crescendo. We understand their tactic, but can't agree with the claim that they have the students' best interests in mind. Chicago's e-scooter pilot program came to an end last week, and you had mixed opinions about the scooter's future in the city. They seem somewhat dangerous, but not much more dangerous than a bike. I would like to see less companies and better standards for parking, like docks or spaces. Looking forward to see how this service evolves in Chicago. Pull the plug on the scooters. Scofflaws cause danger to themselves, pedestrians, and others. I've had plenty of close calls with scooter riders and have seen them violate traffic laws daily. Many of you felt bittersweet about former Cubs manager Joe Madden returning to the Los Angeles Angels. Good luck, coach. The Cubs should try to hire a proven manager who has one of the best records in baseball. Oh, wait, they just let that one go. Congratulations, Joe. Glad we don't have to face you. Lucky LA, sad for Chicago. And lastly, we heard some nice words on guitarist Joel Patterson and his tribute to the Beatles. This segment made me suddenly, for a while, forget about all the huge problems in the country and instead think I was in a time long ago in the early 60s when all seemed right with the world. As always, we appreciate hearing from you. Join the discussion on Facebook and Twitter or post your comments on our website. And that's our show for this Monday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. Updates on the Chicago Teachers Union strike and contract negotiations. And actor Joe Mantegna on a new play he's directing about comedian Lenny Bruce. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Phil Ponce, and I thank you for watching. Good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices. Robert Clifford is the honoree of this year's Illinois Bar Foundation's annual fundraising event that raises money to enhance the availability of justice for those without attorneys throughout the state.